turn off transcription, which is the first thing that's usually on a recording, and I'm using that as an alignment for me. And I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. So you should all see our lovely board for today. What we're going to do is going to do our usual icebreaker. Name, pronoun, where you're from, favourite train journey. I decided to bring in something a bit different than favourite bus stop. Then I'm going to go through the usual housekeeping, go through the usual previously on, but I'll talk about that when we get to the other end of what we're doing next. And then we're going to focus on the accessibility work that we've done for the last 3 months. Going to talk about what did we do, what did we find out. I've got people from the Cody team coming along. So they're going to come along. I'm going to invite them in, probably be about 3 o'clock for a little 15-minute demo of the work that we did. And then the feedback corner today, I'm going to ask you for your feedback on the accessibility work and focus in on that, because I think it'd be really useful to get to gather that user feedback, because this is a showcase of where we got to. So, hey, I'm Dr. J, use they as a pronoun. I'm your service owner, SME, hand waver who makes pretty diagrams happen and waves my hands a lot. And my favourite train journey, just prior to lockdown, I was travelling to Amsterdam on the train every Sunday and back every Thursday evening. And I actually really, really liked that journey. It was a lovely journey. I was travelling on the last train out over to Amsterdam on a Sunday and the last train back on a Thursday, and it meant I worked an extra half day to the rest of the team, but it was just one of the most relaxed international travel journeys that I've ever dealt with. Once I was on board, it was just so much easier than flying. That's all that I will say. And I'm going to pull up my list of people and we'll go from the top. So Amy, you're the next person up.
Yep, good afternoon. I'm Amy Brown. I use she or they. Open data platform manager, Travelline and PlusBus. And a favourite train journey. Not sure in terms of location, but I would say a train journey where the seat next to you is reserved and then nobody shows up is quite a pleasure. That's always what I enjoy.
Fantastic. And Bibi, you're the next one up.
Please familiarise yourself. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm on the train right now. This is not my favourite train. My name is Bibi Barahi. I work for DFT as policy advisor. Pronouns she, her, they. And favourite train journey, I think I'm going to be boring and say Eurostar, only because it is so easy and I live in London. So it's just a very easy, nice, lovely, short-ish journey. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bibi. Gerard, you're the next one up.
Gerard Barter, Transport for London, he, him. Favourite journey, Inverness to Wick, basically the far north line. Yeah.
I will take it that those are two special places to you, Inverness and Wick. Thank you for that. Leon, you're the next one up.
Sure. Hi everyone, Leon Byford. Pronouns, take your pick, really. Where am I from? I'm also from Transport for London. Favourite journey, put me on the spot there. I'd say, maybe the Caledonian Sleeper. That's quite a nice, relaxing journey.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Natalie, you're the next one up.
Hiya, my name's Natalie Gledall. My preferred pronouns are she, her. And I'm a product manager with the software provider Ito World. My favourite train journey, I guess one where the train's not delayed, start. But I'd have to say I'm going to be quite boring, I guess, and say if I'm travelling anywhere from where I live in Yorkshire, it's usually to London. So just straight in and out down the East Coast Main Line.
Sounds good. I know the York to King's Cross, isn't it? Yeah. I'm trying to remember if it's Euston or King's Cross it comes in at. And Paul, you're the last one up.
Yeah, I'm Paul Clark, he, him, and I work for Esoterics, a software provider, providing services to rail users primarily through TOCs. Favorite train journey, I've done it twice now, Stockholm to Kiruna, up in the Arctic Circle, just, yeah, sleeper, waking up to the snow. It was pretty nice.
Oh, that sounds
Yeah.
lovely. Fantastic. So thank you, everyone. So super quick, I'm just going to go through the housekeeping. Then I'll go through the previously on, which we've all been through many times, and I'll talk about what we might do with that. And then I'm going to really focus today on what we did on the accessibility. This is like a showcase of playing back everything we did. And then at some point I will quickly message the Cody team and get them to come, and they're going to do about a 15-minute demo of what we did technical wise, and then I'm going to talk about what we're doing next and get your feedback on that, and then get some feedback from you on what we've done in the accessibility work so far. So unfortunately it's a lot of talking from me today, and because it's hay fever season, fingers crossed that my voice holds out. Hay fever season is basically from now till the end of time. I'm allergic to the entirety of this hemisphere. Very quickly, there's a YouTube channel. These are all recorded. They go up on the YouTube channel. You're all going to be famous at some point in time. You can also follow us on Eventbrite, which you will probably do. And there's a newsletter where we give updates on our stability and how we're performing, as well as product updates, as well as updates on the monthly meetings. The next meeting is at the end of April, start of May. We may need to tweak some of that. If we have to, we'll go to a week later, so we're just after the elections, but I will quickly let you know if we need to do that. I think, as we were saying earlier, we're a small group, we're discussing something very bespoke, so we seem okay to still go ahead. Previously on NaPTAN, the archive service or the managed removal, Gerard signed up to this the other day, which was brilliant. TfL is now on board, and we now can remove stops in a managed process from the system. We actually have some APIs for this. We are waiting on approval to be able to make them live. So Natalie and Paul, you'll be able to get a list of all of the blocked ATCO codes that people should no longer be using. So it's kind of a list of everything that has been withdrawn from service or managed removed or removed from service. So we'll keep you in touch via the newsletter as to when that goes live. There's still stuff about street versus schema. This will be probably a very long and involved and continuous discussion around how we get the street matching the schema, especially bringing in new modes of transport that people wish to have in NaPTAN, which includes things like your electric bike racks and your Boris bike or similar racks. What are they called? Santander bikes currently. Everybody's being really good and precise, as I spoke about last time, in quality. Actually, people are being pretty good on the translations. There's some people who are falling outside of this, and this is one of the things that we're having a look at. Coaches, we just had a discussion with BODS. They're starting to bring across and take control of the coach data. So BODS and I are going to work together to make sure that any coach stops are represented in NaPTAN correctly. The coach references and the 900 coach stops are no longer required. Nobody's told me that they're using them, so we've withdrawn this from NaPTAN. If we do need to put them back in, I will let you know. Data retention has been deployed. We've saved 97% of the monthly storage costs by putting this in place. Yes, that's the saving was 97%. We didn't reduce it 3%. We reduced it to 3% of its original value. And there's an ATCO code split going on currently in ATCO area code 300 is splitting into two. We will be communicating when that happens. We've done some tests on the staging server. We've got a little bit of development work to do so you can get to the files. And as soon as it's ready, we will drop you drop you an email. It was due to be this week. It might not be until after Easter. We're just waiting to see where we get to with some of the bits and pieces. Elise has said that she can migrate all of her bus operators in less than 3 weeks. We will see if that happens, and we'll keep you updated. Hopefully there's nothing previously on, so we're going to quickly run across and start on. I'm not going to go through what NaPTAN facilitates because you all know that and you all do it. You all get Beryl and Beverly to get together. You're all aware, hopefully, of how the data flows across the entirety of the system, with NaPTAN as that kind of underpinning data of what is where all the way through, that just kind of provides that reference point that allows a bus operator to say, this bus is this far from this bus stop, and the real-time predictor says it's going to arrive in so many minutes. Gerard, I know London does it slightly differently to everyone else because London, but also I know that GPSs don't work so well in London. So you've come up with a different solution for your real-time. We have a really nice flow of data within the NaPTAN data service with a number of little hexagon, which are services that do little transformations of the data. So the first one checks it against the schema, the second one publishes it and splits it into an XML and a CSV file. And one of the things that it does is it strips out any PII information, it strips out the notes field to remove any PII information, and then combines them and publishes them as a national service. So we've got this model of these nice little blocks that do individual pieces. So when we started on what happened with accessibility, you've all got this. You can all read the incredibly long bits and pieces. We are trying to do this as is pretty much every country that we can find. Nobody has a solution for getting accessibility into their public transport data. There are various standards and things that are being worked on, but one of the things that we found, and we sat down and we made some decisions around what our approach would be. And our approach would be that we would work on bus stops for 3 main reasons. One, they're 97% of the NaPTAN data set. So it made sense, even though it's complicated to work with that much of your data set, they are 97% of our NaPTAN data set. So figuring out what to do for those would solve a lot of the data set. They cover the first and last mile of any journey for most people. Like, we know that one of the things for London is that everybody within certain zones are within 400 metres of a bus stop. That's not the same around the rest of the country, but they are often that first and last mile of the journey. There's also many areas where bus is the only transport available. There's no trains, there's no coaches. It's bus to do between this village and this part of town. We also decided to base our personas on interviews with users being formed both by the CEN work, which is shown above, and the Atkins work, which they did on rail stations and rail platforms. And what we're doing is compatible with those standards. We might be refining things slightly differently or having a slightly different lens, but they're broadly within the same groupings. And we made the decision to begin with wheelchair users, as bus operators are reporting on accessibility of their buses for wheelchair users into BODS and TNDS using their TransExchange files. So when they're talking about a bus being accessible, they're talking about it being accessible as in generally having a ramp of some sort, and it also may or may not be able to kneel to a curb. So that accessibility has been judged widely around wheelchairs. So, what problem were we wanting to solve? Yeah, many of you have seen this before, so this is going to be a fly past. This is Beryl. Beryl lives in Bristol. Beryl wants to see her friend Beverly. Beverly lives in Birmingham. This is Brenda. Brenda is in an electric wheelchair. Brenda also lives in Bristol. Brenda is also friends with Beverly. She also wants to go to Birmingham to see Beverly. When it comes to planning this journey from Bristol to Birmingham, it's multi-operator, so there's more than one operator of the same type of transport. Multimodal, so you're changing modes of transport, and you're crossing LA boundaries, so you're crossing between various local transport authorities to get there. Beryl can use a travel planner. She can plan her journey in one place, and she has all the information she needs to have agency and autonomy over her travel plans. That's a really nice, undisputed piece. Brenda can also use a travel planner. Unfortunately, she cannot plan her journey in one place because she needs to check with every operator, mode, and local authority to get that accessibility information. And in many cases, she cannot gather all of the information she needs to have the agency and autonomy over her travel plans. There are two outcomes of this. Usually, Brenda decides not to use public transport to make the journey. And one of these outcomes is she drives using a private vehicle, which means that we are unlikely to meet the government CO2 emissions goal. The other option is that Brenda decides not to travel at all to see Beverly, and that increases her social isolation, which means that we no longer meet the goal of inclusion of disabled people within society. So why, and this is telling you how to suck eggs because you all know this, why is Brenda not able to do this? Beryl's transport was linked up in the early 2000s when NaPTAN was created. NaPTAN allowed the communication across those local authority boundaries and between operators and between modes to kind of say what is where for all public transport. So this means that NaPTAN stops are described in a consistent, and consistent is taking a lot of work there, but in a consistent format, with each having a unique identifier. So if you're talking about a stop, you can use either the ATCO code or the ATCO code or the NaPTAN code to describe exactly the stop that you're talking about. Brenda has problems because everything is in a silo for each operator. Because she needs to go to each of those to view the accessibility requirements, and the information is not consistent between providers, and sometimes the information is not available to the public. So the outcome we want to create is Brenda can plan her journey using a travel planner, so she can see all the accessibility information, and it's consistent. The information is consistent between modes, operators, and local authorities, so she has the agency and autonomy over her travel plans. It sounds so simple. Like much of NaPTAN, the outcome sounds so simple. The devil will be in the details. So we approach this as a discovery alpha, which is a combined part where we did a lot of research work around a specific area, and we tried to build a proof of concept at the same time, which is a little bit unusual. In GDS, you tend to do one and then the other. We figured out a way to combine it together. So we ran off three hypotheses. The first one was the data exists for some or most of Great Britain, England, Scotland, and Wales, and it is not published for passengers, or it is published in silos. So one of the examples that we give of a silo, and it's kind of true-ish, but not entirely true, is where data is published to a site or application that cannot be consumed or passed on to another system. So we've used, for example, the TfL Travel Planner app. I know some of the accessibility data is within your open data and some isn't, and it's the some is, some isn't piece that we're not calling you out because you're no worse than anyone else. The second hypothesis was if we provide the access information to a NaPTAN data consumer, somebody like Travelline, they'll be able to take this information and publish it to passengers, surface it upwards to the travelling public. And the third is the access information published will be understood by passengers, giving them the agency and autonomy to make a travel decision. So the third one we've done a tiny bit of work on, and it is informing some of the decisions that we're making. So we spelt this out. So on the discovery side, often referred to as a disco, which is why there's a disco ball. We wanted to uncover all the accessibility information held within the ecosystem. And we did incredibly well there. We uncovered a lot of information that people weren't aware that they had, or people weren't aware that would be useful. We've had some really good discussions with the data consumers, and we've been able to understand what people expect of accessibility information. And then we've been talking with some passengers with access needs to understand what they need to consume information. What are the things that they need? How much detail do they need? What's a minimum? Where does it get? How does it build up? And where would be a maximum of what people need to understand? What we also did at the same time, we did a technical alpha. So this is building a proof of concept system. It's done with an eye that this will drive our decisions towards what we build as a production system, but what we build may not be what we end up with in production. So what we wanted to do is prove that a limited data set that data could be ingested and held. We prove with a limited data set we could link that data to NaPTAN at a stop level, and then we wanted to prove that we could take that limited information linked to NaPTAN and export it in a way that a data consumer could use. So we had 3 really clear goals, and we had 3 really strong constraints. And my team asked me a couple of times, could I break these constraints? And the answer was always no. So the first constraint is we cannot ask a local authority to transform data. Now, one of our reasons for that is we wanted to make it easy for the local authorities to give us data. We didn't want to put extra weight upon the local authorities if they didn't have this data. We're also aware that we have 148 data dialects existing in NaPTAN. So one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to build something where inferences and transformations were managed in the middle of the system, in the center of the system, and published so that people could see what transformations and what inferences were being made. But it also meant that there was one truth of how this was done rather than 148 little differences. When we talk about common names, we've got a way to go to get all of that group together. So we wanted to avoid the problems that exist in NaPTAN. The other constraint was the data must already exist in the local authorities. We didn't want to get any local authorities to have to go out and do an audit or anything like that to have this created. And the third one is we can make no changes to the NaPTAN schema. So we had to use the NaPTAN schema as it came out the system, as it exists at the moment, and a kind of, I think it's 52% 2.1 and 48% 2.4, and one local authority who insists on using 2.2. So it's going to come out in the slightly messy format. It's got to be used, and we can make no changes to it. The limited data sets that we looked at was this Olympic audit. I'll talk more about that. The TfL access information, which has a lot of really good interchange information at stations, and Northamptonshire. We also got Hampshire also gave us some street furniture audits that they had done, which was a really great extra piece of information to bring in. So we worked with 4 data sets in the end. Somerset had a restructure, and we needed rail platforms to ingest the GBR-TT rail station accessibility data. So we've put that on our next list. The other thing that we did is when we did a research journey for ethnographic research, we created a hilariously bonkers, but also typical tourist journey from Victoria Station to Westminster Pier. I believe they travelled on the tube from Victoria to Westminster, then went out to Westminster Pier, hopped on an Uber boat from Westminster Pier to Greenwich Pier, and then from Greenwich Pier they caught a bus up to Greenwich Observatory. And it was chosen because it was and they then caught a taxi home, the person who was there. So it enabled everyone to kind of understand all these little pieces of the journey. Right. What are the scopes and horizons of where we were trying to get to? So we're currently sitting on Horizon 1, which is our alpha, and we're trying to reach that. And I'll just zoom in slightly. So for an alpha, our goals were that a data consumer could ingest accessibility via an API. I'll explain why you've not been able to get to that API. We're just waiting on approval to make it visible to anyone outside of the team. So we've got it there, it's sitting on our staging server. We just want to get permission to put it onto our production server. A data consumer could ingest the accessibility information via an API linking it to NaPTAN data, and you'd be able to ingest that for a limited number of stops or ACCO codes. So it's the third goal of not having to take the entirety of the data set, you could take a portion of the data set. We had a couple of caveats. The information is surfaced as minimal, it might change without notice, as minimal and is consistent from mode or local authority, as minimal and is consistent between modes and local authorities, kind of. And that gets us on to a little bit of the schemas, which I'll talk about in a moment. In the second horizon, which is what we're planning on doing for the private beta, we've got this one user, Brenda, who's in an electric wheelchair. We've also brought up three other users. We've got some blind users who use a cane and a guide dog, and we've got somebody who is in a manual wheelchair. And manual wheelchairs and electric wheelchairs have some nice variations on what they can handle in terms of things. So the goal of our private beta is to get this into production, to make something so that there's a limited journey that can be put into a travel planner, and the accessibility information and the travel planner for a limited number of stops. So what this means is I don't have to see everything, I don't have to download everything. I'll get it just for the stops that I want to go to. And the information is minimal and it might change without notice during the private beta because it's still very much in that private beta stage. But once we get to live, we're going to support all of these users, plus possibly some more. The information is consistent. So we've found a way to make all the information that we get in that's really messy and unstructured and talks about all kinds of different things. We've found a way to infer that into something that makes sense to everybody, and the information can be accessed at the level they need to build autonomy and agency over their travel. So if somebody needs very detailed information, they have that. If somebody needs just a very high level piece of information, they're able to filter, and there are mechanisms that people like Amy and any of the data consumers can use to vary the levels of information, but all of the information is there for their consumption. So I've got one last little bit, and then I'm going to pause for breath and ask for any feedback or questions, but I know that many of you have been through this more than once already. So the first thing is, what is in our control and what is not in our control? So we don't have control over the information that comes into us because it's street furniture data. We don't have information about how the consumed data is being used, but how the journey comes in and how it is used, and also how it is used and presented to passengers, that is all really, really important for making sure and informing us as to how we best serve it, how we infer it, how we do that services up. So our street furniture data, we've got some user needs. I'm just gonna blitz through the important ones. For local authorities, they need to know that they can just give us the data that they've got. They need to know if they give it to us in a spreadsheet, whatever format they give us in, we're going to accept it, it's going to be fine. If it's a spreadsheet that they're getting from another department, that's completely fine as long as we have an ACCO or a NaPTAN code, and we'll talk to people about how they can do some data matching there. And what we also want to work with local authorities who haven't engaged during the alpha to help them understand what is accessibility data. Is it all street furniture data? Is it partial bits of it? What are the important things to give us? Then we also have a few issues specific to agents. So Andy Hole was really involved during this testing, and we want to make sure that if he's able to get accessibility information from a local authority, he doesn't have to do any transformations. He can just upload it to us. He doesn't need to put it in any systems. And also the local authorities can possibly supply it directly, which is a different relationship between us and the local authorities who work with agents like Andy and Tansy. So that is something that we're going to explore in the private beta. All of the data comes into the centre. So we have NaPTAN, you'll publish, or Gerard, I think, is the only one on this call who publishes NaPTAN. Gerard puts NaPTAN in, the data comes out the end, and it's used by Amy and Natalie and Paul. What we're then looking at is how we combine that with some accessibility information. So we have this Olympic data, which was created in 2016. It's not great, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Then we have some inferred data that we got from the street furniture. So we took in the street furniture data, and from that we've looked at how we can infer accessibility data. For example, if somebody gives us curb heights, we can infer whether or not a bus could safely stop and drop a ramp. If there's a curb cut, we can infer things around the accessibility of the onwards journey. If there's tactile paving, if there's lighting, all of these things we're able to get from the street furniture data. We've grayed out audit data because we've not found any yet, although if somebody has some, I'm sure we will ungrey that. But it's kind of like, would almost be the 3 grades of information. And that audit data we would also look at and potentially infer to ensure that it matches all of the rest of the data and the way that it talks about accessibility, because accessibility is seen through these different lenses. Amy, you're famous because you're one of our, as Mike and Amy who run Travelline, you want to obtain data about the accessibility information at a stop level so you can use it within your journey planner. And from this, we uncovered there were two key questions that, and ways that journey planners are using the information. So one of them is showing a planned journey and putting the accessibility information on top, which is one way of doing it. So you've got the journeys that have come from your journey planner, or the routes that have come from your journey planner, and you put the accessibility information on top, and Brenda can choose which journey matches her needs. The other option is that Brenda can tell the system what her accessibility needs are, and it returns journeys that match her accessibility needs. So this kind of one is working within the algorithm and taking accessibility in. The other one is working to put a layer on top of the algorithm to show what the accessibility of those selected journeys are. And both of them have their challenges. Both of them will need to surface the accessibility information off to a passenger in some way. So that's also some of what we're looking at. We'll be working with you a lot more. So we've used Mike and Amy as the people, but we want NaPTAN to show all of the data possible around accessibility characteristics. We want to bulk download if we need to. We want to use a well-documented common format so that it's easy to work with, because nobody likes working with XML. We want to be confident that the information we've got, we understand how it's defined, we understand what it means. We want to be able to verify the accessibility information, so you know how strongly this should be conveyed to passengers. Is this an inferred data and it's probably going to be fine, or is it this is definitely fine? And how do you indicate that off to a passenger? How do you confidently determine step-free routing? And as how can you confirm that passengers know how to interpret this data? And then when it came to passengers, we've broken it. This obviously isn't in our control, and we have 4 personas that we are starting with, and we're going to start with Brenda, who is a power wheelchaired user, and then we've got a manual wheelchaired user, which I've put the wrong name on. Then we've got Gary, who's a visually impaired cane user, and Gemma, who's visually impaired with a guide dog. So we're going to work with Brenda first as a representative of all wheelchair passengers, and then we're going to work effectively with Gary as a representative of all visually impaired passengers. There may be another visually impaired persona, we believe, that's around partial sight loss, which has slightly different requirements to a cane user and slightly different to a guide dog, especially as a guide dog, as far as we understand, tends to be more people who have more almost total sight loss. So we want to figure out where those boundaries are and how we describe them. So I am going to pause for a moment for any questions, and meanwhile I am going to also ping the team and see if they're ready to come and do a demo. So I'm going to ask, because I know Leon, Gerard and Amy were involved in the research, have we accurately described your needs and what you were thinking, and also what it looks like from both of your sides? And I know, Leon, you kind of sat on both sides of this. Gerard?
Well, actually, as he's saying, I'm the sort of person charged with actually maintaining the data as opposed to sort of coming off it. I think, as I say, whilst you quite rightly emphasise there's no need to do an audit, what would be particularly useful is if we have new bus stops are getting installed all of the time. And what I think needs to happen in due course is there needs to be very sort of clear guidance that if I want to audit my stops, what do I actually do? Because Liam Byford managed to find a data set about accessibility of stops I'd never seen, which I'm not going to start talking about how TfL works because we'll be here all day. But certainly a collective encouraging authorities to actually, route everything through to the people who are actually responsible for NaPTAN will be a start. Also, sort of, it needs to take into, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Bus Centre of Excellence on the call, but there's been 2 presentations lately about bus stop bypasses, which are utterly crucial in terms of that they're always seen for the cycling prism, because cycling lanes are unfailingly good for absolutely everybody until you actually get hit by an illegal e-scooter because you can't see. So we've done some work locally in TfL at a very early stage to actually highlight bus stops that have these bus stop bypasses, which for the benefit of everyone on the call is probably familiar with them, where cycle lanes routed round the back of a bus stop and bus passengers actually have to cross in front of cyclists. So an ability to actually denote that in data, however that's actually achieved, and obviously quite rightly the project has been very open-minded in terms of how we actually achieve the objectives. But I think it's something to sort of highlight. What do we do with new stops? I know you quite rightly highlighted bus stops you prioritise because of the sheer numbers of them, but things like tactile paving. I went on a site visit to Reading Green Park yesterday, although it's not in the TfL area, but that doesn't only have one style of tactile paving, it has 2. So there's still lots of sort of sources of data. And whilst I think it's an acceptable condition at this level to say we shouldn't expect people to go out and audit, I would certainly think it should be a requirement. Not for the sake of it, but actually to sort of produce quality at the end of it and to have sort of clear guidelines around it as well. Yeah, I mean, that would be my sort of emphasis at the moment.
Thank you, Gerard. I think that's a really good point. One of the things that we are looking at, and I know Ron and Charlie have just joined us, who are Cody's from the NaPTAN team. One of the things that we've been looking at is how we capture those what did you call it, bus stop bypass cycle lanes, how we ensure that data is there, because it is incredibly important for anyone who is visually impaired. One of the other things, Gerard, I've got the tactile paving guidelines, and I've noticed that TfL around in the borough where I live, in Southwark, seems to have its own dialect of colour and pattern on particular places. Some of it is matching the standard and some of it is ever so slightly different from the standard. And that's not to shame you. That's saying there's a lot of tactile paving, which is great, because I went around looking for it. So you start to notice it when you're looking for it. It's also how we represent that to blind users, but a lot of the blind users, it's more when they go to a new environment that they haven't been to before. How do we make them feel confident going there? How do we express to them that this is the sort of tactile paving that you're going to get when you come to the pedestrian crossing that's just down from there? There's a lot of really interesting information that we want to start to look at, but we'll start off with the very simple part of, can you easily find the edge of where to stand? Can you easily find where the bus stop is? If you're if you're a cane user. And I think one of the things also was that, Leon, was it you or was it another person from the team who's invited the team to come out to the bus stop accessibility centre that's out in somewhere in southish London, I'm going to say. I'm just as bad at London as anywhere else, so don't worry. Was it you, Leon, or was it somebody?
That wouldn't have been me. That's
Oh.
news to me, actually.
Oh, there's somebody else. Apparently, there's a really, really cool place where you can go and see accessible bus stops and experience what it's like.
Sorry, Dr. J, I believe this might be a bus centre of excellence visit. It's actually a scientist who gave a presentation last week and actually has a laboratory but it's in Dagenham.
That's
Dagenham
the place.
Yeah, so I believe,
yeah.
For benefit of wider, I mean, I've sent a request to attend, but I haven't come back to him, which is unfortunate, because we're planning to go to it tomorrow. But yeah, that's a bus centre of excellence initiative under the DFT.
So we may very well go and do something similar as a team as part of our private beta. At the moment, we've just been focused on passing our alpha assessment. So in terms of passing our alpha assessment, I'm going to hand it over because it's demo time. I'm going to hand it over to Charlie and Ron to talk us through, to share their screens and to talk us through, and you're being recorded as well, both of you.
We won't say anything naughty. Should we do quick intros or?
Yeah, do a quick intro. The intro question this week was, or this month is, what is your favourite train journey? So the standard name, pronoun, where you're from, and your favourite train journey would be really great.
Do you want to go for it first, Ron? Or are you still thinking of your favourite train journey?
I'm definitely still thinking.
Okay, I'll go first. So I'm Charlie, developer on NaPTAN, and pronouns are he, him. I think my favourite train journey would be something in the Northwest Highlands of Scotland, like heading around maybe Fort William to Mallaig or something. And yeah, pass it to you, Ron.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Ron, a developer on NaPTAN. Favorite train journey? Well, I don't make too many. It's always the same ones. So I quite like the train journey from Leeds to London. There's some nice countryside you see on the way there. So yeah, that'd be mine.
Fantastic. And the floor is open to you both. Off you go, share your screens, do your thing.
Thanks very much, Dr. J. So yeah, our presentation is about the kind of tech stuff we've been up to for the alpha, for the accessibility data. So high level, what we're going to look at is some of the kind of thinking and process we've been going through, and then also look at the pipeline, like the alpha pipeline that we've built so far. So I'll start by taking us through, especially like this, the process and the thinking that we've been doing about coming up with a unified schema based on some of the constraints. And a key constraint is we aren't going to ask local authorities to transform their data that they provide to us. We'll do what we can with it, essentially. So with that constraint in mind, we have a bit of a task in terms of potentially making 100+ data sets work together for the time being, at least. That's the approach. So this diagram here is kind of giving a picture of, you know, it's a bit high level, but it's giving a picture of the process that we've been engaging in. So it's, you know, looking at the actual data that are provided, the example or initial data sets, if you like, and then also looking at user research sessions that we've done, and then also, we didn't include it here, but also the inputs of subject matter experts like Dr. J, for example, and then, you know, doing some analysis on that and seeing if we can come up with a schema that kind of fits neatly in the middle of all of these different inputs and constraints. And, you know, we're very aware and open to the fact that this is an iterative, agile process. So we've emphasised this feedback loop here, and the feedback being sessions like this one, also user testing, and then some exciting new stuff that Ron's going to present around a content management system to share our updates. So that's our general sort of aim, really, for the iteration and building up this unified schema. And then this next section is just to say these are the data sets that we've looked at initially. So you can see a characterization of them in terms of how old they are, how many records there are, and where they're from as well. The Olympic data set is obviously very big, so it's given us a lot of data, but the accuracy, I think, is known to be questionable in some cases. So yeah, just to mention as well, we haven't brought in any TfL data yet. This was station data. Obviously, be keen to in the future. So just a hint as well to some of the analysis that we've done. So the process we've been doing is kind of like looking at the data sets and ruling in and out what are useful fields that we think we could incorporate into what we call the unified schema. So this is an example for Northamptonshire. And you can see, like, we've color coded green as, these could be useful to us. Red is not useful, and amber possibly useful. That's something about the data set analysis we've been doing. And then another part of what we've been doing is thinking about what inferences we can draw or potentially would need to draw from the data. So, if you take something like curb height, which is measured on a continuous scale, I think that's the right description of it, potentially, or it might be categorical. I guess something we've been looking at is, for different LAs, different ways in which the same thing is measured, and thinking about how we can work with that variability, coming back to this constraint of the many possible input data sets. So an example of an inference that we have actually applied in the version 1 of the schema is essentially, if you've got a curb height which is greater than 100 millimeters, and also the ground underneath the stop is a hard standing, then we can infer is wheelchair accessible is true. And then, if either of the conditions are false, then we would infer is wheelchair accessible is false. So that's not necessarily there for posterity, but that's the kind of direction we've been going in looking at making some inferences on the source data. Was there any questions on that so far? Or awesome. Okay. Yeah, great. So we'll move on to essentially the alpha pipeline. So I'm just going to stretch to both of these sections. So this is our work so far on building a pipeline to ingest data, transform it, potentially do some inferences if they're applicable, and then also the serving up of that data for data consumers to consume and take a look at, basically, at this stage. So I am going to look at this section and then also demo what we've been doing for the data ingest, transform, and inference. So we decided at this stage to go for Google BigQuery. So it's kind of like a data wrangling tool, cloud-based. It offers us a lot of stuff out of the box, which simplifies our ingest process. So it's got adapters for different file types, for example. And then it also allows us to work using essentially SQL. It's BigQuery's own variation of SQL to reshape and transform the data. So essentially we can build a convergence towards a unified data set. So we can take multiple input data sets and move to a single output data set, which we can then in the next step serve up to consumers. So I can give a quick demo of what's going on with BigQuery. So we basically have this a data project here to work with the data, and we have, as an example, this Hampshire data set, and you can see there's quite a lot of fields here. This is the one we saw the mural board before for the analysis, and then we've got these this is the kind of transformed and inferred version of the Hampshire data set. So if we take a look at that, you can see it's kind of been standardized in a way. We've got the ATCO code to link the data to the rest of NaPTAN, and then we've got these two fields that we saw in the unified schema, and also the date captured as a quite an important piece of metadata. And it's the same essentially for the Northamptonshire data and the Olympic data. They have slightly different inferences, and it's probably too much detail to go into that just now. But essentially, they're all reshaped into this final unified schema. And then what we have here is this data set is in fact a union of the three input data sets we've worked with so far, and they're kind of joined up together with the entire NaPTAN data set. And so just to be clear, this isn't the NaPTAN XML file. This is something separate in a different database. But you can see here, we've established basically the mechanism to join everything together with the NaPTAN dataset. And then if you wanted to either query individual records or take the entire dataset, then this is a representation of these accessibility fields for the version 1 schema for the whole of NaPTAN, basically. So from a data ingest and transformation point of view, that's where we've got to so far. Let me bounce back to the mural. I think there was something else to mention. There is here. So yeah, this is just a kind of a visualization or a table showing the schema and the field types. I guess it's relevant to mention, these we've got Boolean or null. So, false doesn't mean we don't have data for it. False means, sorry, let me say that correctly. False means it's not wheelchair accessible, or it does not have it's explicitly not those things. If it's null, it means we don't have data for it, essentially. And then, in terms of the process, we've started to demo what we have so far, and we've started to get some feedback. Obviously, super keen to get more feedback and to iterate on this in the private beta. And Jay will bring you more in future public meetings. So for the next bit for the serving the data, it's over to Ron. I'll pass the screen share to you, Ron.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, I'll take over that screen share. And here we go, that should be there. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, my Teams isn't working, but hopefully you can see the screen. I can't see anybody, but yeah, I'll go on with it.
We can see the screen, it's fine.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the data serving or data egress pipeline here. So we aim to be quite flexible with the way we serve this data, and we want to cater to our consumer needs effectively. So we have been iterating. We started with one thing, and we're iterating to build out everything we need to give the data to consumers. And so we've chosen for now to serve multiple API endpoints tailored to provide the data in different formats. We started at the start of our alpha with our GraphQL endpoint, which we thought would be great to give granular selectivity on your per stop basis, and would allow the consumer to just get what they needed. This is still quite a useful tool for analyzing the data and getting information. What we learned during our user research during the alpha is that we might be better off using REST endpoints as well, so we can deliver all the accessibility data in bulk in a chosen format. And so this was something that, like I said, we discovered during the user research. So I'm just going to go through a little demo of these. I've got Postman up here, which is just a tool that allows me to query API endpoints. So we can see here from so this is just proof of concept that we're doing. And I can get my, for example, if I send this request here, this endpoint, I can get the CSV data in bulk from our early version of our schema. So this is working with BigQuery in the backend currently. And I'll need to take this response to the file. I'll open this in Excel. Navigate there. So open the CSV file. This is currently what we have. This was a slightly earlier version of the schema, so you'll see some bits missing. But what we have here is Yatco code, watch accessible, true false, has instant service, true false, no date captured. And you'll see this is just all the data accessibility that we had at the time. It's a very similar story for XML or JSON. We chose to offer all these just so we have everything that somebody consumer might need. XML may be less likely to be used, but we know that CSV is definitely something that would be needed, and possibly JSON as a bit more of a newer standard, maybe slightly easier to work with for some consumers. So as you can see, there's the XML, all the data in a very similar format. This was, like I mentioned, one of the earlier versions of the schema, and the same for the JSON here. Wait for this request to come back.
BigQuery be big slow.
It is a little bit like that sometimes. Yeah, you can see our JSON data. It'd be formatted in a similar way. I could save the response and just show you that, but it's essentially the same data, just in a different format. So what we also have is the GraphQL endpoint, which, like I mentioned, has slightly more granular selectivity. So, for example, if you just wanted to figure out which stops had wheelchair access, we could jump into here and just put is wheelchair accessible, true. We could also find data that was just like, okay, we want some that's let's say captured from. So we want something that's only from 2016. And we can send this request off. And we can see our response here in a JSON format. And this is all data that's just from 2016, so it's more recent. And all of these are wheelchair accessible. So this is something that we started off with at the start of the alpha, something that we're going to keep in private beta. It's quite useful, but just getting exactly what you need. So yeah, switching back to the mural. So currently you saw that demo I just did, and the endpoints there are getting data directly from BigQuery. And as you saw, it can be a little slow because we're pulling all these SQL statements and pulling it directly into our app. So what we want to do, and what we will do, what we've started doing, is extracting our accessibility table from BigQuery and putting it into MySQL, which is a more traditional database. And so we know that we can get data a lot faster from this. And it'll also be in a more robust way, more in line with what we've implemented across the rest of NaPTAN, something we're used to, something that will give a lot more confidence to our users, hopefully. Yeah, that's our data egress pipeline. Moving on is our CMS. So CMS being the content management system we're going to use to publish project updates. So we plan to share regular updates on the work we're doing, and we want this information to be in a central location. And for our accessibility work, this will be a key part of our feedback loop. Our aim is to be transparent about the provenance, governance, and inference of the accessibility data. So like I mentioned, we want this to be in a central location, and our solution is to have these updates within a dedicated section on the NaPTAN website in a blog format. So let me just go ahead and show what that would look like. So this is just an early proof of concept. So this is the blog format. We'd be able to post all our updates here, date ordered, and you'd be able to come in and see exactly what's being written here. And so to keep this up to date, we need a support user to be able to share these updates to the section. to streamline this process, rather than having somebody, writing HTML every time we need to create an update, we decided to implement a headless CMS. So you might be familiar with traditional CMSs, content management systems like WordPress, for example, where you have a site and the back end is the WordPress back end, and then the front end is the WordPress front end. So what we want is something headless, so we have something separate that our support users can write their articles in, and we just publish that straight to the NaPTAN website like you saw on that blog section. So like it says here, the solution allows the support user to author and publish the post seamlessly, no coding required, ensuring timely updates in the required format on our website. And so if I come here and show you this is an example of our CMS. Oh, I need to quickly log in here. Give me a second. So I log in here. You can see our content manager. And this is a section where a user could come in and create a new entry. So for example, if I just do, let's make a test one here. Let's make a heading. We have a body here. Let's do a little numbered list. I can add a tag as well, so this will be useful for sharing updates in the future. Add whatever tags we need, we can put them in dedicated sections in the blog as well. I save that, publish that. If I head back to the NaPTAN site, you can see our new test blog entry here. I go into it and we have it in the right format, and also, with our GovUK standards, so everything's all normalized there. So this is a quick way to allow our support users to publish updates as and when they happen. It allows us to get quick feedback as well. That's our proof of concept on the headless CMS. Hopefully that all made sense, and hopefully that was useful.
So before we send Charlie and Ron back to Cody land to do more marvelous things, are there any questions for them or any thoughts?
I'll just say, I it's great to see that that export of all the data, because I think that's something that we need for if we want to plan journeys and actually take that accessibility data into account in the actual routing. So that's quite key. So great to see.
And Leon, that request is driving one of the new fundamental principles of NaPTAN. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at providing every one of the API endpoints in the 4 different styles of the API. So we're going to do a REST that enables you to get CSV, XML, and JSON. There'll be a RSS feed, which is like a podcast feed. There'll be GraphQL for all the different NaPTAN endpoints, and there's also going to be a webhooks, which I still don't understand how it works, and Ron and Charlie have attempted to explain it to me more than once. I'll eventually get it and figure it out and see and understand how it works. But what we wanted to do was ensure that NaPTAN wasn't a blocker to innovation, that all the different, if you wanted data from NaPTAN, it was available in all the different ways. It's a little bit of extra work on our side, but I believe that it opens up so much for the ecosystem, rather than locking everybody into, you've got to get it in XML, you've got to download it all at once, because that just locks everybody in to a specific mindset and also a specific way of doing it. I know that getting that information as a block, if you can API it, you can download it every hour, you can refresh it as often as you need, and it just will make it so much easier for you. Even if the other thought that I had for you, Leon, is if you're downloading it, do you want to only download the things that have changed since you last downloaded it, or do you want to download the whole lot every single time? And it's thinking about the reprocessing needs that might be within people's systems.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think we sort of when we actually look at the detail, then that would be good point. I think that's one area where actually the webhooks would come into useful, because you sort of can do a bulk download of all the data on a sort of periodic basis, but then you have those webhooks, so that whenever something changes, you then get that ability to. I assume that's how it would work. You'd get just the data that's changed, and then you can sort of update your local copy, and then until you do the next sort of bulk download.
Ah, cool. No, that explains why somebody tried to describe me as like a pulley pushy system. You can pull the data, but it can also push data to you. that's been the best explanation that I needed of the difference between them. Thank you for that. There was one other thing. Nope, my brain. Oh, yes. As soon as we can, we will get those alpha endpoints that Ron was just showing available to anyone who would like to test it. So it's, like I said, it's going to be an alpha. It's proof of concept. The data will change dramatically at various points and things like that, but it's there to allow you to look at how much you would need to do to ingest and to use this data, if that makes sense, and which mechanism is going to be best. So thank you, Charlie and Ron. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dr. J. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
So I will reshare my screen and I will talk about hypotheses. Just give me a moment to hit on the right buttons. Teams, the new Teams has a small delay that I have to be mindful of. So we had 3 hypotheses, and what I wanted to go through is just look at how these hypotheses, they lined up with our data producer, our data consumers, and our passengers, and wanted to look at the things that we've proven, the things that we've discovered are a little bit more complicated, and the things that we're very clearly taking on to the private beta and going to be having a look through there. So for the first one, that the data exists for most and it's in silos. We know we've proven that LAs have data that can be useful as accessibility data. Most of the accessibility data is with the LAs. It's just not curated in the same place in a consistent structure. And the collection of accessibility data can be easier than assumed. Sometimes it's a matter of just connecting up to the right part of a department, or it's not, and it's more, it is somebody else's job. We just need to ask them for a spreadsheet every now and then. One of the things that we have found is it's not always true. The streets furniture management and public transport management and information teams work closely. We know that they don't. What we're taking through is that the collection of stops data is done periodically and can be enriched. So this is what Gerard was talking about, of as new bus stops are put in, as new systems, as people go out to survey to figure out if they need to move bus stops and things like that, that information can be gathered and delivered. And one of the things that we want to look at in the private beta especially is how we take that data. And if you give us a big set, do you need to give us all the big set again, or can you just give us the 10 that you've just been out and surveyed? And how do we handle that within our system? There's a lots of little bits and pieces that we will need to sit down and figure out. The details will grab us. The stops accessibility data doesn't change often. It's physical in the world. We know that, yes, stops occasionally, you get temporary stops in place. I live by Elephant and Castle by the construction site, and there's a bus stop that constantly seems to be moving up and down the street because of the construction traffic. So there's a lot, but once the construction traffic is gone, we know that bus stop's going to be pretty much in the same place with the same infrastructure. Nothing. If a curb is put in, it's very rarely that a curb is taken out. If a hard standing, asphalt or street blocky, tiley things are put in, can't remember what they're called, concrete blocks that you walk on, are put in, they don't tend to be taken out. So you tend to, if you end up with a curb height and a hard standing, that seems to be consistent and never seems to degrade. Assets management software has the ability to easily capture data. That's well in the future. When we'll look at that. Data producers can export accessibility data from their software. We know that's not always true, and we're going to have a look at that. If provided the NaPTAN team is able to translate current data in a useful, consistent format into accessibility data, we think we can do this. We've done this with a couple of small data sets. We now want to gather more during the private beta and test this out. We've got some ideas of how we do this. We've got some technical ideas of where this goes in the future. Inconsistent accessibility data can be converged. So if somebody is saying curbs are high, medium, low, as long as they tell us what high, medium, low is, and if somebody else is measuring them, we can convert the two, we can combine the two together into a single unified way of talking about this curb height is the right height that you can pull a bus up and drop a ramp on, and these ones aren't. So there's a lot of inferences that we're going to be talking about. NaPTAN will have some mechanisms for users to upload their accessibility data. We know that we've got smooth uploading sorted. We know that you can easily go onto our site and give us data. So using the systems that we've got before, we're going to build something to give us your accessibility data. And we can create an accessibility data structure to match the current schema. So we can publish stuff about the current NaPTAN schema and about the first accessibility schema, and then the second and the third and the fourth. Does that all make sense? Is there anything from the data producers that you're like, ooh, that's a red flag for me? No? All good. Fantastic. So for the data consumers, Mike and Amy, we've got, if we provide the access information to a data consumer, they'll be able to publish it to passengers. Now, we think we've proven most of these, and we've got a couple that we're going to take into the beta. We're very aware that we weren't able to give you that API, and we're working to get those published as quickly as we can. We know that the consumers will be able to use the new accessibility data in a meaningful way. Consumers would like to pull the data for NaPTAN using API REST, GraphQL, or webhooks. We believe you'd also like NaPTAN to push you the data as an RSS feed, maybe for when a stop is updated, you would be able to get that instant information that a stop is updated. We're not sure. We're going to ask you some questions about that. Data consumers would like to know how to use NaPTAN's accessibility data. We're going to need to provide some kind of guidance, which is why we're building a CMS. And consumers would like to use the new accessibility data to prioritize and optimize the route shown in their journey planner. So we know some of you will be taking this data into your routing algorithms. Some of you won't be able to do that, and we'll be putting this data on top of it. Both of those models are completely fine, and we want to make sure that what we provide doesn't force you one way or the other. We provide something that can be used in either model. Does that make sense to everybody who consumes data? I'm seeing a thumbs up from Leon. Amy, I'm assuming you're nodding with the screen off.
Yes. Yes.
I could almost hear the nod. And finally, for our 4 passengers, the access information we publish will be understood by passengers, giving them the agency and autonomy to make a travel decision. We know that passengers would like to know how to use the provided data to plan their journeys, and they would feel more confident in journey planning when the accessibility data is provided. So what we want to do is work with people who are providing data off to passengers to have a look at what that early feedback is, to run some sessions to show what it might look like, and to get that early feedback so that we can work together as a ecosystem to iterate, because what you need will inform how we do the inferences, which will maybe inform how we ask the local authorities for some data, or how we prioritize some data over others. So you'll notice there's a lot that's got this little red B on it, which means the next stage. So the next stage is planning on doing a lot of things. So what we had a look at, what I then went on to do, is what's next. So just to remind everybody what the scope for the private beta is. And we've got funding up until basically the end of January 2025. I'm sure we'll get more and smooth that out so that this will then run through into something that's a little bit more public beta and then live. But for the private beta, this is what we're focusing on. We're focusing on one user who can plan a limited journey on a travel planner, and they'll be able to view accessibility information for a limited number of stops or ATCO codes. So this is not saying we can get the whole of Great Britain in one go. This is not saying that it's going to be absolutely all singing, all dancing. It's limited, it's small, but it's something that gives somebody who is in a wheelchair of either type able to quickly go, I know how to do this, I know I can do this journey, or I can't do this journey, and giving them that confidence that that information is correct and they're able to use it. It's also minimal and might change without notice, and that's something that we will need to flag when we're giving this information to passengers in that first instance. So, how are we going to do this? First off, we recognise that the Olympic data is not that good. I also then looking at what to call the next version of the Olympic data. I've been listening to something about the Titanic, so I suggested the one after Olympia was the Titanic. I was told that I was not allowed to call the data the Titanic data, or any references to Titans, so it's called the New Olympic data. So what we want to do is look at how we create this core set for all of the ATCO area codes. Now, we're starting off with a hypothesis that trunk stops are more likely to be accessible than branch stops within the same local transport authority. So we think that if we look at the number of buses per hour outside of London, because London's insane in its number of buses per hour in a lot of places, but the numbers of buses per hour will allow us to identify those trunk routes that are high trafficked, that we know that a lot of local transport authorities have put effort in on those core bus stops to make them as accessible as possible. So they tend to be more accessible than the branch routes, which might only have 1 or 2 buses a day. And even if they're still marked stops, that's what we're going to have a look at. And we've done some quick tests of this hypothesis, but we now want to go and do this properly across the data, have a real look and see where it holds true and where it doesn't, and what adaptations we need to make. We might need to adjust the buses per hour in some local transport authorities so we hit the right kind of idea, and we can create that new Olympic data set based on the current NaPTAN data, mixed in with TNDS and BODS data. So we're taking data that we can already access, taking it in and making some really interesting inferences. While we're doing that, one squad is doing that. Another squad will be creating a production pipeline for ingesting, holding, inferring, and publishing the accessibility data. So doing the work that Ron and Charlie showed and setting it up as something that's production ready, will build the front end so that people can drop data to us quite easily rather than emailing us ridiculously large spreadsheets. Putting how we ingest that, how we hold it, what analysis we need to do. Can we hold it? Can we ingest it and then analyze it? Do we need to analyze it and then ingest it? How we do the inferences from it, how we publish it, making sure that all of that is done at a production ready stage, and we've got the APIs in those different formats. So there's no downloads page, there's an API access page. As well as this, we're going to create the CMS that Ron showed. I'm the support user, as is BB, as is Alex and Sarah, who some of you may have met. So there's 4 of us. So it's creating a CMS so that we can publish the data. We can publish the provenance, governance, and inference for all the accessibility data in an easy to read way. Some of the other things that we can publish will be things like what goes out in the newsletter, which is the stability data every month, the information about product updates, the information about the public meetings, all of that. We're going to look at how we put that into the NaPTAN website so it becomes much richer, and there's a lot of that information being able to be published in various ways. And one of the advantages of using the headless CMS over something like a WordPress, I was arguing for WordPress because I knew how to use the back end. They showed me that I could have the same back end and they could do funkier things with the front end. It means that we can reorder things quite easily. It's code to move things around the website, and it will just rebuild the page using code and instantly be, as you saw, whatever we produce, it's instantly in the GDS format. And finally, publishing the accessibility schemas, and there might be more than one schema running in the private beta phase while we work out what's needed. There might be low information, high information schemas. There might be different versions that have more or less accessibility information. So we want to play around and give you the ability to see those. So that's in the now. Those are the first things that we're going to do. And then the next things that we're going to do is bring in street furniture data for the local authorities we connected with in the alpha phase. So we're going to come back to TfL and get as much data as you can give us. We're going to go out to Hampshire. They've given us 20 rows. We want as many as they can give us. Northamptonshire have given us, I think it's 120 of their 1,600 stops. So we're going to see if we can get the rest of it. So we're going to take that accessibility data and publish and do those inferences and publish that across our system. And then we'll talk about that, how we infer that street level data, how it's described at a street level by the data consumers, and also how we do those inferences. And then we're also going to work with the journey planners in ways that you can consume this data. What are the things that we're not providing that you desperately need? Just let us know. We can put those in and have a look at how we do it. So that's in the next phase. So we'll finish off the now, we'll move to the next, and then in the later, it's bringing in rail and metro stations accessibility. So we know that we've got good accessibility information for London, for most of the underground stops. We know that we've got really good accessibility information at a platform level for most of the rail stations. So we want to look at how we bring that data into the system in the same way so that people can look across multiple modes and have that same understanding that this is step free, this is blind, if I've got a guide dog, this station's fine, this station might not be, this station is always staffed, etc., etc. Does that make sense to everybody as a kind of plan? And it feels like super light planning. There's other stuff that we've got going on, but I wanted to focus on the accessibility piece here and just kind of talk about the key things that we're doing at the now, the next, and the later stage. Are there any red flags for anyone in this approach? Natalie and Paul, I'd be really interested in your thoughts as data consumers there. Oh, Gerard.
Yeah, so I just had a quick question about, it's sort of related to this. You said you had a backlog of stations for National Rail that hadn't actually been put on the nationwide data set. I know it's a bit of a cheeky question, although it is slightly related to it, because obviously any new station is going to be automatically accessible because it has to be. So just wondering, is there any sort of progress update and things like Reading Green Park being put onto the system? Because again, if they're being put onto the system, we can sort of apply these conditions straight away, as I mentioned earlier, almost as like test cases. Well, not test cases, but live cases.
I totally get your point, and I totally. So I'm going to break it into two parts. One, putting on the new rail stations. We did a rail audit last year, and it was thought to be really good until Brent Cross West didn't appear on it, and that meant that we somehow didn't know that Brent Cross West was coming up. So we are now working with the rail team to try to figure out how they get the information to us so that we can put the stations in, so that we're not having to get them from you, Gerard, and other users. In the meantime, my colleague Alex and I are working to go through the backlog and sort it out. I have just been swamped, I think would be the way to describe my workload, swamped trying to keep on top of some of this. So we're charging through that backlog, but one of the biggest problems is the rail audit is not bringing up all stations. So we don't know when new stations are coming. We should be informed at some point in time around 3 months or so before the station goes live. There should be a way of getting us that data. We've tried a couple of different ways and it's still not coming through to us. So we're trying to work with them to figure out why we can't get the information the way that it should be coming through. In the meantime, we're trying to catch up on all of the other ones and redo an audit against the right data set so that we don't lose a whole pile of stops. There is also there's a third aside. The second one is on the accessibility. We want to take the access data that from the audit that the rail stations did, they have told us that we believe that they have a mechanism for updating their accessibility information because they provide it at a platform level. We are hoping to take that information in for new platforms. We've had to put that into the later simply because NaPTAN doesn't currently contain platforms for rail stations. It's a bit of a data problem, and it's on our big list to solve, and it's on the next list for the BAU work, is getting platforms into NaPTAN and sorting out the NaPTAN versions of rail stations so that we don't have 5 Clapham junctions, because currently we have 5 Clapham junction stations rather than 1 Clapham junction with the right number of platforms. So that is something that we're trying to sort out, Gerard. I look so harassed about it because I'm trying to fix the data set while taking in new data, while trying to verify that we've got the correct data in there, and it's just doing my head. We will solve it, and it's going to be a bit of a focus for after Easter. This becomes a bit of focus. Is that okay? If you've got stuff that you need urgently, like Brent Cross West, I know we were late, but we were late because it just didn't show in the audits.
No, that's fine. We'll try. No, I appreciate the detailed response, and we'll try not to open any more stations for a while. Which I don't think we're doing. So, yeah.
It's okay. Don't worry, Gerard. Leeds is opening a whole pile of stations. I've been watching. What's his name? Jeff Marsh. Jeff Marsh. Every time I watch Jeff Marsh and he goes to a new station, I go to NaPTAN and I'm just like, no, we don't have it. And I know that I'm about to have emails and meltdowns. So yes, I was watching him because I think it was he went up to the new Leeds Metro, and I was looking at all the stops that were being reopened and being changed from train stations to metro stations, and that's also another piece that we're trying to sort out is what is a train station and what is a metro station. And I know that Tottenham Court Road Elizabeth Line is technically a rail station within a metro station, and I need to sit down and figure out what that modelling is. Third piece, just really quickly, I've started to work, because this will affect Gerard and Leon slightly, and possibly everybody else. I'm started to get on the meetings around Heathrow and the Heathrow bus stops and them being all moved around and being put in the right places. One of the things that we found is there's a Heathrow bus stop that's listed as a rail station because in 1967, this was a workaround for a problem that has just remained in the system. So I now need to figure out, do we still need the workaround? What is another way of working around the workaround? Should that stop be it shouldn't be a rail station because it's very definitively a bus stop, but this is street versus schema. And this is how do we make the street and the schemas and the information match very, very clearly without it breaking, because I have a rail station that is listed as Heathrow that basically sits in the middle of the bus terminal. And that's just one of the problems that I uncovered this week. So there's a lot of, when I talked last time about cleaning up the quality of data in NaPTAN, it's not just at a local authority level and giving you the ability to remove stops is really great, working with you to ensure that all the different types of transport are reflected in there accurately, all of those things. It's also uncovering all the zillions of workarounds that have existed and looking at the best way that it goes into the future. So Gerard, if you know of any weird little workarounds you've got within the system to solve a problem, put them to one side and we'll have a one-to-one and just go through your glitches and your weirdos.
Because when I was talking to a colleague outside TfL yesterday about Heathrow is something we want to pay attention to from a data perspective. So if there's any conversations on Heathrow in particular or anything to do with London that you think we should be involved in, and I'm very happy to spend that time. But obviously I need to know that they're happening first. So
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean,
I only found out
no,
the
that's
other
fine.
week.
No, I'm sure you did, but yeah, that's fine. If you
I'm
think,
suddenly
yeah. If you think it's
sorry.
anything I can do, I'm happy with that. That's fine. Sorry,
Yeah,
carry on.
that's amazing. I think we'll be bringing you a number of bus stops to move and rename, and then one of the things that I was potentially looking at is, and this is an even wider one, but it relates to accessibility, and I'm just gonna zoom up slightly. So, Brenda probably cannot travel by coach because her wheelchair is too heavy for the lifts of most coaches to get her up into the seats. And most people who are in an electric wheelchair have slightly more support needs than somebody in a manual wheelchair. And I'm making a wild assumption there. Whereas Gemma, who's using a lightweight manual wheelchair, and I've got a friend who does this, they use a wheelchair mostly, and it's got little motorized hand wheels, but they also have limited amounts of walking. So they have their crutch strapped across the back of their wheelchair, and if they run into steps or something that they don't want to, that is going to block their journey, they will get out of their wheelchair, slap the wheelchair down into a little backpack carryable, and then walk up the stairs using their crutches, and then reformat the wheelchair and go on. So that person could easily use a coach. And this is one of the interesting things around what is a coach stop and what is a bus stop, because if a coach is stopping there, how do we indicate that it's a coach is useful for one type of wheelchair but not for another? How do we break that down? And it also ties into things around if I'm traveling with a large case and I'm going to a bus, I know that I have to wrangle the case onto the bus myself with my stick. Always fun. If I'm traveling by coach, I know that the coach driver will wrangle my suitcase into the hold under the bus or under the coach, and then I can climb up the stairs and sit on a seat. So there's a very different experience and a very different level of accessibility of these two types of transport that seem really the same, but are really very different. And how do we express that when in NaPTAN we've got BCT for bus coach tram, and we're seeing them as basically being the same. So I've got a few thoughts, Gerard, that I might bring you around how we indicate bus only stops, bus and coach stops, and coach stops. There's also the added funsies for the bus operators and the coach operators of how many axles will the stop allow, because if you have two coaches with three axles side by side, they get stuck because they can't maneuver around each other because their turning circles are too big for the bays at Heathrow. Don't ask me how I found that out. I just have one of those brains that picks up information. So these are the sort of things that I need to figure out how much of that information needs to be passed on to the right people and where that information should sit, because it's very much about how a bus operator or a coach operator needs to consume the NaPTAN data and what information do they need to know so that they can give the right information to people wanting to catch their services. Funsies. So that's where we are. Natalie and Paul, do you have any thoughts or any feedback on this from your point of view? As I know Ito World is the great aggregator, and Paul, I'm not quite sure. I'm sure we've met, haven't we?
We haven't met, but you've met my colleague Liz in person somewhere. I can't remember where.
Would have been at the Transport Futures Data in Birmingham.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. I vaguely recognised the name of the system, but I couldn't remember much more about it. So, is any of this useful information that you could start to consume and do things with inside your product?
So we don't have a specific use case for it right now, but certainly the two fields you've hit on, wheelchair accessibility and assistance service, are two I think most important. We have a routing engine that takes GTFS, and I know that has is wheelchair accessible flag. And then we were also bidding for a project that could have used the assistance service flag. Yeah, so I'm quite new to the NaPTAN data set. And yeah, we don't have anything specific around accessibility right now, but yeah, it sounds like you're spot on there. And also the API, we can consume whatever, but yes, it sounds very suitable. Yeah.
Thank you. One of the things that we're also, depending on some technology choices we make, one of the things that, because NaPTAN we're looking at as a product owner or product system person, it's really interesting to look at something where your boundary of what you're aiming for is 2050, not 2025, not 2030, but 2050. So everything I'm trying to do, I'm trying to think of, would this still work in 2050 if we make some assumptions about the levels of change, etc. Will the system allow a certain amount of change and evolution within it? Does it lock us into something? Which is why the 4 APIs. One of the great things is one of the technologies that we're potentially looking at would allow us to take in anything and output any format. So one of the things that we're kind of looking at is, could we take in anything with the NaPTAN data set and all of this information that we're taking in, and could we turn it into like a GTFS file that's got the right formatting? Could we turn it into a NetX file if the UK started to move towards something like NetX? Could we do something like that, which means that Gerard and everybody doesn't have to go out and go through a massive upgrade of their production systems, because all of their NaPTAN data is solid and stable and doesn't change that much? But can we open up innovation and do things in this middle space by providing slightly different formats than just NaPTAN 2.1 or NaPTAN 2.4? And what other formats should we look at? So that will be a really interesting futures conversation. But I'm trying to think, it's very difficult to think what life will be like in 2050. Given the vast amount of change in the last 5 years of everybody's lives, I'm just like, okay, so there'll be some kind of public transport. I'm sure trains may still exist.
NetX is something we're looking at, and it seems like the future. That's the adopted format by the EU, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, so it's weird. The EU's moving towards it, but Google likes everything in GTFS, which is an American-driven standard, which has, in my mind, a slightly different way of looking at the relationship between a bus operator, a bus, and a bus stop, and the local authorities and the people who look after the physical spaces. So there's some really interesting little corners to unpick there around how things are described and who describes particular things. But that's all currently vastly theoretical, because I can't even get more than half of you to be on NaPTAN 2.4. And NaPTAN, although we found out the other day, when I started in 2020, there was very few people. We couldn't do anything with 2.4. The previous NaPTAN system was throwing away any data that wasn't 2.1. With the migration from one platform to the other, to the new platform, we now don't throw away 2.4 data. We started off in 2021 with 15% of the local authorities giving us 2.4 data. We now have 48% of local authorities giving us 2.4 data. So that's a massive movement, and that's one of the biggest movements in this ecosystem that I've ever seen. And I didn't even know that it happened. Wasn't until we did some double checking of some data that I actually found out how many of you have moved to 2.4. So it is really amazing to see that movement, and that means that we can start to look at, okay, what's the next? how do we continue to evolve this ecosystem? How do we keep stuff stable enough to describe what's on the street, but where does it go? And that's all philosophical and way more than just accessibility. We've got about 10 minutes left. Natalie, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share? We can, I'll turn off recording in a few minutes, and you're welcome to share after the recording as well.
Yeah, sure. I guess from our perspective at Ito, very sort of a similar vein to what Paul was saying, as in there's no sort of specific use case for us yet, but as conversations develop, that might emerge. So, but it is very insightful to join the conversations and see, the process that's happening and what the plans are.
Fantastic. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to thinking about the accessibility work so far. So the work that we've done, the work that you've seen, the work some of you have been part of, what's given you joy? What was good and useful from this? What's been great? What's frustrated you? What wasn't good or useful? What just had you tearing your hair out? And what made you sad? What things are missing and what things should be happening? And then finally in the corner, there's our contact details. So BB is the product owner for NaPTAN. So if you want to talk about the policies or some of those, feel free to get in touch with BB. BB and I meet up all the time and go through all the different contacts we get anyway. I'm the service designer, subject matter expert. If you want to get hold of me, email me. The central contact email is naptan.mptg. Please don't send changes to the central stops to my personal email address. They just get lost in the system. Always ensure that you CC in the central contact, because otherwise my mailbox is just the death. Is the death zone of action sometimes. So I'm going to stop sharing. And yeah, put up your thoughts. I will also stop recording. So before I do, just want to thank Leon's like this, the standard disclaimer. Thank you everyone for your time, your effort, your energy, your inputs. It really is important, and it really means that we are getting NaPTAN better. NaPTAN is becoming a much more complete, much more interesting data set than when we started. I think the quality's also improved a lot. I know that it's not the most some people say it's not the most exciting data set, and I'm like, it is the most exciting data set because it's the one that's used all the time, that runs every bit of public transport in this country. Without it, within 3 months, stuff would start to fall apart. Within a year, it would just be almost impossible. It'd be so difficult to plan a journey across multiple transport places and NaPTAN would need to be recreated to fill that gap. So I'm really, really appreciate everybody's input and time. Let me just stop recording. Stop.